2 minutes. That's all it took for the narrative to shift forever. Graham Paddon didn't want a statue. He didn't ask for a banner flying over Carrow Road or a 10-minute tribute video played on a giant stadium screen before kickoff. He just wanted to play football. But football, as it turns out, has a very short memory for men who don't sell shirts. Born in Manchester in 1950, Paddon entered the professional game not through a silver spoon academy, but through raw, unfiltered grit. While modern players walk into multi-million-pound setups with sports scientists monitoring their sleep cycles, Paddon's apprenticeship at Coventry City in the late 1960s was an industrial-grade filtering process. You survived on work rate, bruises, and a quiet, unrelenting refusal to back down. Let me be fair for a second. Coventry saw his talent. They knew they had a midfielder with an engine that didn't quit and a left foot that could turn a cagey midfield battle into a shooting gallery. But football's boardroom bosses have always viewed players as inventory. Assets on a spreadsheet. And just like that, he was sold. Norwich City came calling in 1969. Coventry needed cash, Paddon needed a stage. It looked like a standard transfer on paper. Just another player packing a bag and heading east. But look closer at the mechanics of the deal, and you see the first fracture line in a career defined by being undervalued. They traded him away for financial ledger balance, treating a young, hungry creator like a spare part in a warehouse. Did it break him? Not a chance. Under manager Ron Saunders, Paddon didn't just adapt to Norwich, he weaponized his anger. He became the beating heart of a side that refused to know its place. This wasn't the polished, corporate Premier League we stare at today through our screens. This was heavy mud, shin guard optional, bone-crunching English football where technical players were expected to fold under physical pressure. Paddon didn't fold. He thrived. By the 1971-72 season, Norwich City were storming the second division. Paddon was orchestrating the midfield with a cold, calculated precision that left opposition managers tearing their hair out. And then came the moment that caught the attention of the wider football establishment, the kind of performance that usually triggers a multi-million-pound bidding war and a fast-track ticket to the national team. Highbury, 1972. Arsenal. If you ask modern casual fans about Highbury, they talk about Thierry Henry or Dennis Bergkamp. But ask the old guard who watched the game in freezing wool coats, and they remember the afternoon Graham Paddon tore Arsenal's midfield to absolute shreds, capping it off with a masterclass hat-trick from midfield. Let that sink in. A midfielder walking into Highbury and netting 3. The stadium went dead silent. The press box had to scramble for their notes. Who is this kid? Where did he come from? Why isn't he playing for a giant? For a brief, shining second, the spotlight swung his way. The whispers started. The comparison machines warmed up. But football's gatekeepers don't like anomalies. They don't like brilliant technicians emerging from clubs like Norwich without paying an entry fee to the traditional elite. The industry noticed him just enough to exploit him, but never quite enough to protect him. West Ham United saw the raw, terrifying damage he could inflict. They didn't just want him, they broke their club transfer record to get him in 1974. East London became his arena. Upton Park, with its cauldron of noise and working-class fury, was tailor-made for a player who played like he had a point to prove to the entire world. And prove it he did. Let's talk about what happens when talent meets destiny, and the system still tries to cheat you out of the reward. By 1975, West Ham wasn't just a football club, it was an institution riding a wave of tactical sophistication and raw, unyielding grit. At the center of that machine was Graham Paddon. He wasn't loud. He wasn't doing post-match influencer interviews or launching lifestyle brands. He just arrived, laced his boots, and destroyed whatever midfield the opposition put in front of him. The 1975 FA Cup Final. Wembley Stadium. Fulham stood across the turf. The nation tuned in. And while headlines later chased other names, the engine room of West Ham's victory belonged entirely to Paddon. He dictated the tempo, closed down space like a shadow, and recycled possession with a calm assurance that suffocated the opposition. Trophy secured. Medal around his neck. You'd think the establishment doors would blow wide open for him now, wouldn't you? You'd think a proven winner on English football's grandest stage would be walking straight into the England senior squad. Think again. While lesser players with bigger PR agents and elite club addresses were handed international caps like party favors, Paddon's phone stayed quiet. One single U23 appearance. That was the entire extent of his recognition from the Football Association. Let's follow the logic, or lack of it. A record signing, an FA Cup winner, a midfield general dominating domestic giants, and yet, completely invisible to the men picking the national team. Why? Because the power structures in football have always operated on an insular, boys' club frequency. If you didn't play for Liverpool, Manchester United, or Arsenal, you had to work twice as hard just to be noticed, and 4 times as hard to be respected. And Paddon didn't play the political game. He just played football. Then came Europe. The 1976 European Cup Winners' Cup. If you want to understand how good Graham Paddon really was, look no further than his masterpiece against Eintracht Frankfurt. The stakes were planetary, well, European, which felt the same back then. The tension inside the stadium was thick enough to cut with a knife. And then, Paddon took a touch 30 yards out. No hesitation. No overthinking. Just pure, brutal technique. He unleashed a thunderbolt strike that defied physics, searing through the damp European air before crashing into the back of the net. The Frankfurt keeper didn't even move. He just stood there, watching the ball ripple the mesh. It was a goal worthy of the gods. It sent West Ham hurtling toward the final and cemented Paddon's status as a continental-grade operator. If you did that today, your face would be plastered across every TikTok feed in existence within 3 seconds. Brands would be throwing endorsement deals at your feet. Paddon got a handshake, a pat on the back, and a quick turnaround for a brutal league match 3 days later. Football took his peak years, extracted every drop of magic from his boots, and offered him zero institutional insulation when the inevitable disaster struck. Because the game is cruel. And it always comes back to collect its debt. The return to Norwich City should have been a glorious homecoming. A veteran hero returning to where it all began to guide the next generation. Instead, it turned into the night the lights went out. A heavy, mistimed challenge. A sickening crack that echoed across the pitch. A broken leg. In an era before modern sports medicine could reconstruct a knee or a tibia with surgical miracles, a severe break was often a career sentence. Paddon fought his way back, of course he did. He wasn't built to quit. But the explosive pace was gone. The yard of separation he used to create magic had vanished into scar tissue. The body was compromised. But the system wasn't done breaking him yet. Let's follow the trail further down, because this is where the story stops being just about football and starts being about how modern sports chew up men and spit them out into the shadows. When your body can no longer sustain the demonic physical demands of the English top flight, what does a football romantic do? He doesn't retire to a television studio to collect a fat paycheck talking nonsense about desire and tactical blocks. He plays because he's addicted to the green grass, the smell of liniment, and the sound of a leather ball hitting a boot. Enter the nomadic chapter. Graham Paddon didn't care about brand equity. When his body slowed down, he packed his bags and went wherever the game was still pure. Across the Atlantic to the North American Soccer League with the Tampa Bay Rowdies. Down into the trenches of the lower English leagues with Millwall. Even out to Hong Kong to play for Eastern AA. Think about that for a second. A man who tore apart Arsenal at Highbury and rocketed goals past European giants is playing in front of sparse crowds in unfamiliar stadiums thousands of miles from home, not for the glory, not for the bank accounts of modern millionaires, but simply because he couldn't imagine waking up on a Saturday morning and not kicking a ball. That is what football used to be about before it turned into a global entertainment product wearing a corporate lab coat. And when the playing days finally, mercifully ground to a permanent halt, the game didn't offer him a cushioned landing. No ambassadorial roles. No high-profile consultancy positions. Just the grimy, thankless trenches of coaching and scouting. He served as an assistant manager and caretaker at clubs like Stoke City and Portsmouth, holding clipboards in freezing winds, trying to pass on a dying art to players who were increasingly more interested in their haircuts than their first touch. Later, he took his knowledge abroad, coaching in Brunei. He was a football lifer, trapped in an industry that only celebrates you when you're making money for the house. For years, he drifted further and further from the public eye. The hyper-commercialized monster of the Premier League emerged in the 1990s, complete with wall-to-wall television coverage, astronomical salaries, and a sanitized, corporate culture. In that shiny new world, players like Graham Paddon were treated like black-and-white static from an old television set. Irrelevant. Outdated. Forgotten. Football moved on. It didn't look back to check who it had left bleeding in the ditch. And then came November 19, 2007. Just like that, he was gone. A sudden heart attack. No grand national mourning period. No minute-long applause across every Premier League ground with pyrotechnics and tearful tributes. Just a quiet passing at the age of 57. Let that number sit with you for a second. 57 years old. A man who gave his entire youth, his physical health, and his absolute genius to a sport that treats its veterans like disposable napkins. Did FIFA issue a solemn statement reflecting on the structural brutality that chews up players like Paddon? Did the modern television pundits who rake in millions pause their tactical analysis to acknowledge the debt they owe to the artisans of the 1970s? Of course not. They had a new broadcast package to sell. They had another billion-dollar tournament to market. Paddon's death didn't move the stock price. It didn't generate clicks. So the machine rolled right over his grave and kept on driving toward the next cash cow. Let's step back and look at the big picture here. Because stories like Graham Paddon's aren't just tragic personal anecdotes, they are indictments of an entire sporting culture. We live in an era where football fans are force-fed manufactured drama, corporate piety, and sterile narratives crafted by PR departments in Zurich and London. Every 4 years, FIFA rolls out another billion-dollar spectacle, demanding we worship at the altar of their brand while they sweep the human and historical cost under the luxury carpet. They want you to look at the bright lights, the multi-million-dollar transfers, and the billion-pound broadcast deals. They want you to believe that football has always been this magnificent, benevolent paradise. It hasn't. Football has always been a meat grinder. It takes working-class kids with golden left feet, milks their peak years until their ligaments snap, and then discards them the second they stop generating profit. Graham Paddon was one of its greatest victims, not because he starved in the gutter, but because his extraordinary brilliance was systematically erased by a sport too arrogant to remember its own history. He scored at Highbury. He won the FA Cup at Wembley. He shattered Eintracht Frankfurt with a 30-yard missile. And today, ask a casual fan under the age of 30 who Graham Paddon is, and you'll get a blank stare. That isn't an accident. That is design. The establishment doesn't want you remembering the players who played for the love of the game rather than the size of their sponsorship portfolio. Because if you start remembering men like Paddon, you start asking uncomfortable questions about where all the money goes today. You start wondering why the people running the sport live in glass towers while the ones who built the foundation die forgotten at 57. They can erase his name from the mainstream history books, but they can't erase what happened on that turf. They can't delete the memory of a Manchester boy walking into elite stadiums and dismantling the establishment piece by piece. Just gone. Bye-bye. That's how the system treats its own. This won't be the last time we pull back the curtain on how football treats the people who actually made it worth watching, trust me. The corporate suits in charge are banking on your short attention span. They're betting that you'll click away, forget this video, and go right back to consuming their sanitized entertainment products. Don't let them win that bet. What's your verdict? Does modern football owe a massive debt to the forgotten grafters of the past, or are players just commodities in a global market where sentiment doesn't matter? Drop your take in the comments below. I read every single one. A like genuinely helps this channel beat the algorithm more than you'd think. And subscribe if you want real, unvarnished football coverage that doesn't bend the knee to FIFA or corporate media. Football at this scale is never just a tournament. It's a moment in time. I'll see you in the next one.